The fourth floor was already gone. I knew that before I reached the landing because the smoke coming down the stairwell was the wrong color. Not gray, not the soft brown of paper going up, but a flat, scorched white. That means a fire has stopped eating what it started with and moved on to the building itself. It was 6:41 in the evening on the 9th of March. I am a salvage conservator, and I have walked into 11 burned buildings on purpose. And I have never once walked into one with a 3-year-old on my hip. Ida had my coat in both fists.
Welcome, everyone! Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
The window on the 3rd floor turn does not close and never has, and the draw through it was strong enough to pull the hair off my neck. Then a hand came out of the dark and closed on my wrist, and a voice I had spent 4 years training myself out of said 3 words. I have you. I did not have to look. I have known that voice since I was 22. What I want you to understand is that I did not feel saved. I felt caught. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Let me back up, because if I leave it there, you will think this is a story about a fire, and it is not. The fire took 11 minutes. The rest of it took 4 years, and I was awake for all of it. My name is Wren Ostergaard, and I read char. That is not a party trick, although I have used it as one. When a thing burns, it keeps a record of how it burned. Paper that goes up fast leaves a feathered edge, soft as a moth's wing, because the flame front outran the moisture. Paper that smoldered leaves a hard black lip you can chip with a fingernail. Linen scorches differently from cotton. A photograph that has been near steam curls toward the emulsion. A photograph that has been near flame curls away from it. Give me a burn page in 40 seconds, and I will tell you roughly how hot the room got, roughly how long it held, and whether the water that put it out came from a hose or a sprinkler head, because a hose leaves a directional tide line and a sprinkler leaves a ring. I learned to do that at Halcyon Row, which is a 5-story brick archive on the east side of the river, with a green copper roof and a 4th floor window that has not closed properly since the coronation. It holds the city's civic paper, 900,000 items, ward minutes, dock ledgers, coroner's rolls, the whole slow argument a place has with itself about who it thinks it is. It also holds, in a gray box on the 4th floor, 41 pages, a woman named Martha Ostergaard, carried out of a burning parish hall in 1961 with her coat over her head. Martha was my grandmother. She was 19 and she was not supposed to be in there. She got 41 pages out and the roof came in behind her, and she never once, in the 50 years I knew her, described it as brave. She described it as rude, which is a very Ostergaard way to describe the best thing you ever did. So that is the first thing you should know about me. I come from a family that goes into buildings. The second thing is that I was, at 27, extremely composed. I want to be precise because composed is a word people use to mean calm, and I do not mean calm. I mean I had a system. I do the difficult work in the first 2 hours of the morning. I keep my hands clean. I write everything down in pencil because pen bleeds if the paper is damp, and everything I touch is damp. I have a way of holding a burned page at the 2 corners that will bear weight, and I do it without thinking now. And I have been told it looks like carrying a sleeping animal. Composed is not a personality. It is a technique. I built it in a specific year for a specific reason, and by the time the story starts, I had been running it so long that I had stopped noticing it, the way you stop hearing a fridge. The third thing is the cloth. It is a square of gray linen about the size of a folded newspaper, hemmed by hand on all four sides with stitches you can barely see. My mother made it. You use it to lift ash. You lay it flat. You draw it once. You never scrub, because ash on burned paper is not dirt. It is the surface of the thing itself. And if you push it, you will push the words into the fiber, and they are gone. One pass. Then you fold the cloth and put it away. I have carried it in the inside pocket of every coat I have owned since I was 19. It has been washed 4 times in 11 years. I could tell you what is folded inside it right now, but that comes later. And if I tell you now, you will read the rest of this the wrong way. And the fourth thing is Aveline Roth. I met her on a Tuesday in October when I was 22, and a week into my first real post, which was as the most junior person in a building where everyone else had been there since before I could read. I was in the loading bay at 7 in the morning trying to get a pallet of gray boxes up a ramp that had a lip on it, and I had been losing for 6 minutes. She came round the corner of the building in a Navy service coat with the collar up and stopped and watched me lose for about 4 more seconds. Then she came over, put one hand flat on the top box, leaned, and the whole pallet went up the ramp like it had been waiting for permission. I said, "Thank you." She looked at the boxes and not at me and said, "There's a lip on that ramp, report it." Then she went away. I want to be honest about what happened in me, because I have had 4 years to be dishonest about it, and I would like to stop. Nothing happened. That is the honest version. I did not feel a jolt. I did not think, oh, I thought that woman has a very specific opinion about ramps. I went inside and I reported the lip on the ramp, and it was ground down 11 days later. And I did not connect the 2 events until the following spring. The jolt came much later, and it came in a corridor, and it was about her hands. But if I skip to that, I will be doing what everyone does with these stories, which is to pretend the beginning was already the middle. Aveline was 32 then. She was a station officer at Kestrel Street, 3 streets from the archive, and Halcyon Row was on her run, meaning that if the building ever went up, her crew were the ones who would be walking into it, which meant she came through twice a year with a clipboard and a torch and an expression, and made a list of every single thing we had done wrong. And the list was never short, because an archive is a building whose entire purpose is to store fuel in stacks. She was tall, black hair, always in a low knot, always dry even when the rest of her was not. Gray eyes, and around the outside edge of the gray, there was a ring of warm copper, so distinct that the first time I saw it in good light, I thought she was wearing something in her eye. It is a family trait. It is in the Roth medical file, and it is in the portrait of her great-grandmother in the commissioner's anteroom, and once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. She wore a watch on her left wrist with a crack across the crystal, top left to bottom right. When she was thinking about something she did not intend to say, she pressed her thumb flat against the strap and held it there. I have watched her do that perhaps 200 times. I have never once seen her do it and then say the thing, the jolt, since I said I would tell you. It was March, 5 months after the ramp, and there had been a small fire in a solicitor's office 2 streets over, A heater against a curtain, nothing. One room. And Halcyon Row took the salvage because we were the only people in the city with a vacuum freeze dryer. 60 boxes of wet-scorched conveyancing files came in on a Thursday, and I was on the intake bench at 9 at night by myself. Because I was 22 and did not know yet that you are allowed to go home. She came in at 9:10 with a fire investigation form that needed a signature and found me holding a page at the two corners. She stopped in the doorway. She watched me carry it across to the drying rack. 8 steps. She did not say anything until it was down. Then she said, "You hold it like it can feel it." I said something ridiculous. I said, "It can't." And she said, "I know." And she pressed her thumb to the watch strap, and she did not say the next thing, and she signed her form and left. That is the jolt. A woman noticing precisely how I use my hands, and then declining to explain why she had noticed. I went home and lay on my back on the floor of a rented room and was extremely composed about it for approximately 9 weeks. We were together for 3 years and 1 month. I am not going to give you all of it, because the good years of a thing are the part that is hardest to say without embarrassing everyone. But I will give you the shape. She was not a warm person, and she did not pretend to be, which is a mercy. Cold people who perform warmth will take the roof off your life. She was precise. She was in a way I have never met since. Reliable in the small. If she said 8, it was 8. If she said she would call at the end of a night shift, she called at the end of a night shift, including the ones that went badly, including the one where 2/3 of a warehouse came down, and she called anyway and said 4 sentences in a voice like a level surface, and then said she had to go. She had a specific talent for the size of a gesture. I got a chest infection in the second winter, and she did not send flowers. She came round on a rest day and rebuilt the seal on my window, which was the actual problem. When my mother died, she did not say anything about it at all. She just took over the paperwork. 9 weeks of forms, registrar, pension office, bank, and handed me a folder at the end of it with everything closed and a list of the 4 things only I could sign. And I sat down on the stairs and cried for a solid hour, and she made tea and did not touch me until I put my hand out. The size of the gesture, she said once, should match the size of the problem. Everyone gets that wrong in the same direction. We bonded in the second summer. I will be careful here because this is a public account. It was not a ceremony and there was no register. It was late June. It was too hot. We were on the flat roof of her building with the city going orange. And it had been coming for months in the way those things do. And afterwards, she put her forehead against mine and stayed there for a long time and said nothing. And I understood that I was not going to be able to build a version of my life that did not have her in it. A bond is not a wedding. It is closer to a change in the weather. You know where the other person is in a room without checking. Your scent goes over to something that is not either of you separately. Hers had always been cold and clean, like the inside of a stone church. And mine is smoke and beeswax and the dust off old paper. And what we made between us smelled like a building that had been warm all day. Her mother found out in September. Ottoline Roth was the fire commissioner for the city and had been for 11 years. And before that had been the first woman to hold a battalion in the county. And before that, a great many other firsts. And I want to be fair to her because being fair to her is the only way to make you understand why it worked. She was not a snob about my job. She has on record called archivists the only people in this city who understand that a building is a promise. She was not a snob about money either. The Roths have 4 generations in the service and no property to speak of. What she was a woman who had watched a service take her own mate and her brother, and who had built her entire life on the principle that you do not put an unvetted variable next to something you care about. I was an unvetted variable. She had me tested. That sounds worse than it is, and also exactly as bad as it is. There is a compatibility panel. It is a real medical instrument, and it is genuinely used, mostly by people arranging things at the higher end of society. And it does 2 things. It maps bond stability, and it flags the small number of pairings where the bond is what the literature politely calls induced, where one party's scent chemistry has been altered by treatment or by intent to force a match that would not otherwise hold. An induced bond is a fraud. It is prosecutable. It is, in a service family, unsurvivable. Ottoline arranged the panel through a private lab in the 3rd autumn, framed as a formality, and Aveline hated it, and I said let her have it because I was 25 and I thought that if I was reasonable enough for long enough, the woman would eventually be reasonable back. The result came in November on a Tuesday. I have the original. I have had it for 4 years and 119 days. It is a single sheet, 2 columns, and the flag box on the 2nd column is empty. And at the bottom, there is a stability index of 94, which is high enough that the technician wrote unusual in the margin in biro, and then apparently thought better of it and did not cross it out. That is the sheet I have. The sheet Aveline was handed in her mother's kitchen on the 18th of November had my name on it and my date of birth, and a flag box with a cross in it and a stability index of 31, and my signature at the bottom on the consent line. The signature was mine. It had simply been lifted off the consent form of the real panel and put onto a different one. I did not know any of this for 4 years. What I knew was that she came to my flat on the 19th of November at 10 to 7 in the evening and stood in the middle of the room with her coat still on. She said my name once, then she said, "Was it done to me or did you know?" And I said, "Was what done to you?" And she looked at me for a long moment. And this is the part I have taken out and looked at perhaps 4,000 times since. She looked at me and something moved through her face that I could not read then and can read now. And she said, "I'll take that as an answer." She had never once in 3 years taken silence as an answer. She was the most careful listener I have ever met. She would wait 90 seconds for the end of a sentence. That night, she gave me 11. I want to say what she did not do, because it is the load-bearing detail of the whole 4 years. She did not shout, and she did not accuse me of anything out loud, and she did not take the coat off, and she did not sit down. She went to the door. She stopped with her hand on it, and she pressed her thumb flat against the crack in her watch strap and held it there for about 3 seconds. And then she left without saying it. She had said it every single time she had ever left that flat, every time, 3 years. Coming off a night, going on to one, going out for milk, 3 words from the door. Always the same 3 words. And I used to think it was a tick, and I used to answer without looking up. "I have you." That night she did not say it, and the door closed, and I stood in my own front room and understood, before I understood anything else, that whatever had just happened was finished. I found out I was pregnant 19 days later. I want to be clear-eyed about the next part because I have had a great deal of time to construct a version where I behaved well. I did not behave well. I behaved composedly, which is different. I did not call her. I wrote 4 messages and sent none of them. I told myself a story in which she had left because of a fault in me that had been there the whole time and had finally become visible. And the story was clean, and it explained everything, and it required nothing of me. And I lived inside it for 4 years, the way you live inside a coat. Twice, I got as far as the door of Kestrel Street Station. The second time I got as far as the counter, and a very kind sub-officer asked who I was looking for, and I said, nobody, and left. Ida was born on the 11th of August at 4:20 in the morning, 7 pounds 1 ounce, in a room with a view of a car park. She came out with her fists closed and her eyes shut, and she did not open them properly for 2 days. And when she did, on the Friday, in the gray light off the car park, at about 6 in the morning, I was holding her under the window, gray eyes, and around the outside edge of the gray, a ring of warm copper. I sat there for a long time. I remember the exact temperature of the room. Then I did the arithmetic that any reasonable person would do. And I got the answer that a bond flagged as induced with a stability index of 31 does not produce a child. And the arithmetic did not work. And I could not make it work, and I was 24 and alone in a hospital with a 2-day-old and no way to hold both of those facts at once. So I put one of them down. I have thought about that decision every day since, and I still do not know what else I could have carried. 4 years passed. I am going to give them to you in one paragraph because that is honestly how they felt. I stayed at Halcyon Row and got good, and then got better than good. And by 26, I was running the salvage bench, which meant that when anything in the county burned, it came to me. I moved into 2 rooms over a launderette on Fenner Street because the floor was warm. I bought a second-hand pram off a woman who cried when she sold it. Ida learned to walk at 13 months in the drawing room, holding the rail. My Aunt Solveig took her 3 days a week and asked me exactly once who the other parent was and never asked again, which is the single greatest kindness anyone has ever done me. I did not date. I told the 2 people who asked that I had someone once and it did not hold, which was true in every word and a lie as a sentence. And on the 2nd of February, at 11 in the morning, the city sent us a letter. The letter said that Halcyon Row had failed its structural fire review, that the 4th and 5th floors were to be cleared within 30 days, that a full resurvey would be conducted by the service, and that the surveying officer would attend from the following Monday. Perpetua Nwosu read it out loud to the whole bench with her reading glasses down her nose, in the voice she uses for documents she intends to fight. Perpetua Nwosu is 71. She ran conservation at Halcyon Row for 26 years and retired at 65 and then simply kept coming in 4 days a week. And at some point, everyone stopped pretending this was temporary and gave her a key. She keeps a kettle on the end of the intake bench that has been boiled, by her estimate, 30,000 times. She has views about the boiler, the council, the copper roof, and me. She got to the end of the letter and took her glasses off and said, 30 days to move 140,000 items, And B said, can they actually do that? B. Lindqvist was 23 and 8 months into her apprenticeship and wrote everything on the back of her own hand in pencil, which I had told her to stop doing 4 times. She had a smudged column of it running from her knuckles to her wrist most afternoons. She was the best natural pair of hands I have ever trained, and she had absolutely no capacity to leave a silence alone, which is a thing I would come to be very grateful for and did not appreciate at the time. I said they can do whatever the review says. And Pet, pouring, not looking at me, said, then we'd better find out who is doing the review. She attended on the Monday at 8 in the morning. I was on the 4th floor when the intercom went, because I am always on the 4th floor at 8 in the morning. And B came up the stairs 2 at a time with her hand pressed to her mouth, which is a thing she does when she has decided something is enormous. She said, the surveying officer is here, and she's asking for the salvage lead by name. I said, that's me. And B said, I know that's the thing. She didn't ask for the salvage lead. She asked for Wren Ostergaard. I want to tell you that I knew. I did not know. What I did was put down the box I was holding and square it against the edge of the bench, and take the cloth out of my inside pocket and fold it and put it back, which is a thing my hands do when the rest of me has not caught up yet, and go down 4 flights at an entirely normal speed. She was standing in the intake bay with her back to me, looking at the ceiling. Navy service coat, black hair in a low knot, the set of her shoulders that I would know from 100 yards in fog. She had made Battalion Chief. It was on the shoulder. She turned round and I watched 4 years arrive in her face and be put away again in about a second and a half. She said, Miss Ostergaard. And I said, Chief Roth. And Pet Nwosu, from the end of the bench, with the kettle in her hand and no expression whatsoever, said, well, here's what I noticed in the first 90 seconds, because apparently I had not stopped doing it. The crack in the watch crystal was the same crack. She had a burn scar on the back of the left hand that had not been there 4 years ago, about the size of a coin. The shiny kind that means it went deep and healed clean. She had cut her hair by perhaps 2 inches. She was thinner through the face. And when I said Chief Roth, her jaw moved once at the hinge, the small muscle that she cannot control and has never known about. And then her thumb went flat against the watch strap and stayed. She did not say the thing. She has never said the thing. She said, I'm here to survey the building. That's all I'm here for. And I said, then let's survey the building. And that was the arrangement we ran, without ever writing it down, for the next 19 days. The survey worked like this. Every morning at 8, she came in with a torch and a laser measure and a tablet. And every morning at 8, I met her at the intake bay, and we went up through the building floor by floor, and I opened doors and she made a list. There were rules, and neither of us stated them. We used surnames. We did not touch, including the things people do without meaning to. No hands passing tools, no steadying at the top of a ladder, no reaching past. We stood on opposite sides of doorways, and when the survey required a decision, we made it in the third person, as though describing 2 other people who worked here. I've never in my life been so tired at 4 in the afternoon. On the second day, she found the window on the 3rd floor turn. She stood in front of it and pushed it, and it did the thing it has always done, which is to travel about 2 inches, and then bind on the frame and stop. She said, how long has that been like that? I said, since before I was born. She said, has anyone reported it? And I said before I had cleared it, "There's a lip on that ramp. Report it." The silence went on for about 4 seconds. Then she wrote something on the tablet and said, "I'll add it to the list," and went up the stairs. And I stood there with my ears going hot and thought, 19 days of this. Ida was not in the building. I need to say that plainly. She was at my Aunt Solveig's 3 days a week, and at a nursery on Fenner Street the other 2. And she had never once been to Halcyon Row, because it is a working archive with 3 floors of open shelving and a boiler room, and because, and I am being honest with you, because it was the one place in my life that had a Roth in it twice a year. For 19 days, I ran 2 timetables in my head and never let them touch. It is exhausting in a way I did not have a word for until much later, when Pet gave me one. On the 4th day, Ottoline Roth came to the building. She came at 4:10 in the afternoon, unannounced, in a good coat, with a driver waiting on the double yellows. And she walked into the intake bay and looked around at the boxes and the drying racks and the 30,000 times kettle. And she said, "So this is where it all goes." I said, "Commissioner." And she said, "Ms. Ostergaard, you've done well for yourself." I want you to understand that she said it without any edge at all. That is the thing about Ottoline Roth. She does not do edges. She had been in the room with me perhaps 9 times in my life, and she had never once been rude to me. And I would have found open contempt about 400 times easier to survive. She looked at the schedule board. She looked at the 30-day clearance notice pinned to it. And she said, "This building has been on my risk register for 11 years. It should have come off it 11 years ago. I want you to know that when it goes, it will not be because anybody failed." Then she said, "My daughter is very thorough. She will do this properly, and then she will move on. I have every confidence." And she left. Pet waited until the car had gone. Then she said, "That woman just told you the ending." I said, "She told me the survey has 30 days. And Pet said, "Wren." And then she did not say anything else, which from Pet is a paragraph. The 5th day was the ledgers. The 6th was the boiler room. And on the 7th, she asked me the first question that was not about the building. We were on the 5th floor, which is the worst floor because the 5th floor is where 140 years of things nobody could classify have been put, in the hope that someone else would classify them. She was measuring the gap between the top of the shelving and the sprinkler heads, which is the measurement that was going to close the building, and she said without turning round, "Do you still do the intake at night?" I said, "Sometimes." She said, "Alone?" I said, "Usually." And she wrote the measurement down and said, "You shouldn't," and moved to the next bay. I stood in that aisle for a moment with my hands on a box. 6 words, 4 years. And what I felt was not tenderness. It was a kind of fury, so clean and so specific that it surprised me. And it was made of this. She was still doing it. She was still noticing the exact shape of how I worked and then declining to say why. That night I went home and Ida was awake because she had had a 2-hour nap at Solveig's, which is a war crime. And we sat on the floor of the front room and she showed me the tin. The tin is a small flat tobacco tin, older than me, and it holds buttons, 30 or 40 of them, from my mother's sewing box. And Ida sorts them, not by color, by whether she likes them. It is an entirely private and completely consistent system. and she has never once put a button in the wrong pile. And if you move one, she will move it back without comment. She was 3 years and 7 months old. She had my hair, which is copper and does what it wants. And she had gray eyes with a ring of warm copper around the outside. On the 8th day, I asked Pet how you carry two things that cannot both be true. I did not tell her what the two things were. She did not ask. She poured and put the mug down and said, "You do not carry them. You hold one and you set the other one down somewhere you can see it. And then, love, you have to go and look at it now and again, because the whole trouble with the thing you have set down is that it does not stop being heavy. It just stops being carried." Then she said, "When did you last look at it?" And I said, "I have to get back upstairs." On the 9th day, it rained hard, and the 4th floor leaked, as it always does. And we spent 6 hours moving 1,100 items, and by the end of it, neither of us was standing on ceremony about anything. She took her coat off. She worked the line with us. She is a battalion chief. She did not have to move a single box, and she moved boxes for 6 hours. B, who is fearless, said at one point, "Chief, you're wetter than the boxes." And Aveline said, "Yes," and kept going. And at 6:30 at the end of it, we were both leaning on the intake bench, and she looked at my hands and said, "You still hold them like that." I said, "It's the only way that works." And she said, "I know it is." And then she said quietly, not to me particularly, I used to be able to tell what kind of day you'd had by how you were holding them. "I want to be exact about what happened in my chest, because it is the whole engine of the next 3 weeks. It was not longing. I had done longing already. I did 4 years of it, and I had it fairly well contained. It was the specific horror of realizing that the story I had been living in, the clean one, the one where she left because of a fault in me, did not account for a woman who could still read my hands across a room. Faults do not survive 4 years in someone's attention. Something else does. And if the story was wrong, then I had made a decision in a hospital room at 6 in the morning on the basis of a story that was wrong, and had held to it for 1,400 days. I went to the sink and washed my hands for a very long time. The next day I set the condition. I did it properly in the 4th floor office with the door shut, because I have found that the things you do badly are almost always the things you did in a corridor. I said, "Chief Roth, I'd like to agree something." She said, "Go on." I said, "You survey the building. You get your list, and your list will be right, and I won't fight you on the 4th floor, even though you know I want to. And in return, you don't ask me anything about the last 4 years. Not one question. Not obliquely." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "That's not a small thing to ask." And I said, "It's an enormous thing to ask. That's why I'm asking it in a room with a door." She looked at the window for a moment. Her thumb went to the watch strap and stopped there. And she said, "All right." And then she said, "May I say one thing first, and then never again?" I should have said no. I want that on the record. I said one. And she said, "I was told something in November 4 years ago. I believed it for a long time. I stopped believing it about 18 months ago, and I have not been able to prove it. And I have not come near you because someone who cannot prove a thing has no business making it your problem." She said, "That is all. I won't raise it again." And she picked up the tablet and went out and started on the 5th floor. And I stood in that office with my hand flat on the desk for I do not know how long. 18 months. She had known for 18 months that something was wrong and had not come. And the fury came back, cleaner than before. And underneath the fury, and I did not look at this properly for another 9 days, was the fact that I had known for 4 years that something was wrong with the arithmetic, and I had not gone either. We were, it turned out, the same kind of coward. It is possibly the only thing about us that has ever matched on paper. The 11th day was the first day I understood what the condition had actually cost her. We were on the 2nd floor with the dock ledgers. She had the tablet in one hand and the torch in the other, and she was reading serial numbers off the shelf ends, and I was writing them down, and I sneezed, and she said, "Bless you," and then went absolutely still, the way you do when you have stepped on a stair that is not there. Because bless you is nothing, it is a reflex. It is what you say to a stranger on a bus. But she had promised not to ask me one thing about 4 years. And I watched her stand there and audit a 2-word reflex for a full 3 seconds to make sure it had not been a question. I said, "That's allowed." And she said, "Noted." And B, 4 bays down, said, "What's allowed?" And neither of us answered her. And B wrote something on the back of her hand. The perimeter held for a fortnight, and I am not going to pretend it was noble. It was mechanical. It was the same skill I use on a scorched page. You decide in advance which 2 corners will bear weight. And you do not put your fingers anywhere else, ever, no matter how much of the page is asking to be touched. We had a routine by the 3rd week. She came at 8. Pet made tea at 9:30 and put a mug at Aveline's elbow without a word. And Aveline said thank you every single time, as though it were the first. At 11, we did the floor we were on. At 1, she went back to Kestrel Street for 2 hours. At 3, she came back and we did shelving heights until 5:30. And every day, twice a day, on the 3rd floor turn, we passed the window that would not close. And every day she pushed it, and it went 2 inches and bound. And every day she said nothing. And on the 16th day, I realized she was not testing the window. She was doing it because I could hear her doing it from the 4th floor, and it told me where she was in the building. I do not know if she knew that was why. I know I had started listening for it. Here is what I cataloged in those 3 weeks. And I want it all in one place because a catalog is the only honest way I know to say what I am not going to say directly. The crack in the watch crystal, top left to bottom right, and the flat of her thumb against the strap when she was holding something back. The coin-sized burn on the back of the left hand, which she got. B found out from a station officer at the sandwich place. Pulling a driver out of a car on the ring road 11 months after she left me. The jaw hinge. The fact that she takes tea with nothing in it and drinks it too hot. The 2 inches off the hair. The way she says a number. She reads serial numbers in 3s, like a phone number, always. The fact that she stands in a doorway on the hinge side so that she is not blocking it. That she never once in 3 weeks sat down in my building. That she says thank you to Pet Nwosu in a voice she uses for nobody else. And the copper ring around the gray, which I saw every day at 8 in the morning in the light off the intake bay skylight, and which was also every evening on the floor of my front room, sorting buttons. On the 18th day, Solveig had a fall. It was not serious, and she is fine, and she was more insulted than injured. But it meant that at 2:10 on a Thursday, I had a 3-year-old and no arrangement, and the nursery on Fenner Street closes at 1 on a Thursday, and the 4th floor had 11 days left. So I did the thing I had spent 4 years not doing. I brought Ida to Halcyon Row. I told myself it was fine because Aveline was at Kestrel Street until 3, and the 4th floor takes an hour, and I would have her out by 22. B took her. B was extraordinary about it. She cleared a space at the end of the intake bench, put a box of blank record cards in front of her, gave her a pencil, and said, "Write, you're on cards." And Ida, who has never in her life met a system she did not want to join, sat down and got on with it. Pet looked at her for a long moment over her glasses. Then she looked at me. Then she put the kettle on and said nothing at all. And I have never loved anybody more. Aveline came back at 2:40. I heard her on the stairs. She takes them in twos, and there's a hitch on the 4th one where the tread is loose. And I was on the 4th floor with a box in my hands, and my whole body went cold in a way I have only otherwise experienced going into water. I put the box down. I went to the head of the stairwell, and I could hear her in the intake bay, and I could hear B saying something, and I could hear Pet, and I could not hear Ida at all, and the not hearing was so much worse than anything I could have heard. I came down the last flight at a speed that must have looked ridiculous. Aveline was standing in the middle of the bay with her coat open and the tablet under her arm. On the hook by the door, there was a red coat, 3-year-old size, with a hood. On the end of the bench, there was a small flat tobacco tin, open, with 2 piles of buttons beside it. And under the bench, in the footwell where the intake bench has a shelf that nobody uses, there was a child sitting with her knees up because Ida is 3 and has excellent instincts about adults arriving suddenly. And B was crouched at the end of the bench with her hand out, saying something quiet. Aveline had seen all 3 things. I know she had because she is a fire officer, and the first thing they teach you is to enter a room and count what is in it. She looked at me, and she said, "I finished the 2nd floor. I'll want the boiler room log tomorrow." She did not ask. I want to be completely clear about the size of that. There was a child's coat on the hook and a child under the bench, and I was standing there with my face doing whatever my face was doing, and she had made a promise in a room with a door, and she kept it. At the exact moment when keeping it must have cost her something close to everything. She got her list. She got the boiler room log. At 5:20, she put her coat on and went to the door, and she stopped with her hand on it, and her thumb went flat to the watch strap and stayed there for about 3 seconds. And then she left without saying it. I sat down on the floor of the intake bay for a while after that. B brought Ida over, and Ida climbed into my lap and put a button in my hand from the pile of the ones she likes, which is the highest honor available in our house. Pet finished wiping down the bench. Then she sat on the stool with her tea and said, "I am going to say a thing to you now, and you may tell me to mind my business." I said, "You've never once needed permission." She said, "You think you are protecting that child. You are not. Nobody in this building thinks that child is in danger. She is 3, she is loved, and she has been in the safest room in the county for the whole afternoon sorting buttons with the fire chief in it." She said, "What you are protecting is the story, the one where the woman left because there was something the matter with you. You have kept that story in very good condition for 4 years. It is the best preserved item in this building." And she said, "The trouble with a story like that, love, is that it is load-bearing. You cannot take it out gently. You have to let the roof come down." I did not sleep that night. I got the cloth out at about 2 in the morning, and I sat on the edge of the bed with it on my knees, and I did not unfold it. And then I did. Inside it, between 2 squares of tissue, folded in 3, was a single sheet of paper, 2 columns, an empty flag box, a stability index of 94 with the word unusual written in biro in the margin by a technician who had thought better of it and had not crossed it out. 4 years. In an inside pocket, through 11 burned buildings. I had told myself I kept it for a legal reason. I had never once in 4 years been able to say what the legal reason was. On the 22nd day, Ottoline Roth came back. She came at 8 in the morning, which is a different thing from 10 past 4 in the afternoon. And she came without the driver. And she waited in the intake bay until Aveline had gone up to the 5th floor. And then she said, "Ms. Ostergaard, walk with me." We walked as far as the loading bay, where the ramp is, the one with no lip on it anymore. She said, "The survey closes on the 9th. The building will go on the schedule and the schedule will be published. And I want you to hear the next part from me rather than from the service bulletin." She said, "My daughter has been offered county command. She has accepted. She takes it up on the 15th of March. County is 90 miles away, and it is a 6-day rota, and it is what she has been working toward since she was 24. And then she said, "I am telling you because you are a serious person, and I would not like you to build anything on 6 days. I said, "You've never been unkind to me, not once. I've thought about that a lot." And she said, "No, I don't think I have." And I said, "Why not?" She looked at the ramp for a moment, and she said, "Because I never had anything against you. You have somehow got it into your head that this was about your family or your money or your job. And it was not. I have spent 40 years watching this service put people into buildings that are trying to kill them. The only thing I have ever asked of anything that goes near my daughter is that it be exactly what it says it is." And she said, "I have never lied to that girl in my life, not once in 36 years. I have gone over that sentence a great many times. It is true. It is completely, technically, load-bearing true. And it is the confession, and she made it to me in a loading bay at 10 past 8 in the morning without either of us knowing it. Because a woman who hands over a document has not, in her own accounting, said anything at all. She went, and I went up to the 4th floor and worked until 7 in the evening and got a great deal done, because that is what I do. The last week was the fastest week of my life. 11 days of clearance compressed into 6 because of the schedule. Contractors on the 5th floor cutting the old steel shelving down into sections small enough to get in the goods lift, angle grinders all day, sparks going up in a column and dying in the air, and a fire watch posted for an hour after they stopped every day, by order of the surveying officer. Because she is thorough. B wrote the watch times on the back of her hand. Pet boiled the kettle. I did the 4th floor. And every day at 8 and every day at 3, on the 3rd floor turn, a window went 2 inches in bound. On the 8th of March, the second to last day, Aveline signed off the 5th floor. She came down to the intake bay at 5:30 with the tablet and said, "That's the 5th. Tomorrow I close the 4th and the survey is finished." And I said, "Congratulations." And she said, "It isn't that." And I said, "No, I know." She stood there a moment longer than she needed to. Then she said, "There's one more thing on the list. The 3rd floor window. I've flagged it 3 times in 11 years, and it has never once been actioned. And after tomorrow, I won't be in a position to flag it again. So I'd be glad if somebody would." And I said, "I'll report it." And she said, "Thank you," and went. That is the last conversation we had before the fire. And I have thought about it more than any other conversation in my life, because both of us stood there and said something about a window. The 9th of March was a Thursday, and it was the last day of the 4th floor. And I had until midnight to get 411 gray boxes down to the 2nd floor. And Solveig was still not right. And the nursery shuts at 1 on a Thursday. I want to be very clear that I made a choice. Nobody made it for me. I looked at 411 boxes and 11 hours and a 3-year-old. And I decided that the safest room in the county was good enough for one more evening. And I went and got her at 4:30. And on the way in, at the door, she wanted to know if she could bring the tin. And I said yes. The contractors finished at 6. The fire watch ran until 7. B had it written on her hand. At 6:20, I took Ida up to the 4th floor with me because there were 41 pages in a gray box in the North Bay that I was not going to let a contractor carry. And because it was the last night that room would exist as a room. And because, and this is the true reason, and I have stopped pretending otherwise, I wanted my daughter to have stood once in the place where my grandmother went in. We were up there about 6 minutes. At 6:38, the lights went off and came back on. At 6:39, I heard the goods lift move, which should not have happened because the goods lift had been isolated at 6. At 6:40, I picked Ida up, and at 6:41, I came out onto the landing, and the smoke coming down the stairwell was the wrong color. Everything I know about fire, I know from afterwards. I read Char. I have never once, before that evening, read Smoke. But you do not need 11 years of training to understand a stairwell that is breathing at you. The draw was coming up past me, which meant the fire was above and behind and pulling air from below, and the flat scorched white of it meant it had already stopped being about paper. Down was 3 flights. Down was where the air was coming from. That is the whole of the thinking I did, and it took under a second. We got to the 3rd floor turn, and the landing was full. Not flame. Smoke at chest height and dropping, the kind that takes the stairs away from you one at a time. I got down onto my knees with Ida against my shoulder because the good air was at the floor, and I put my hand out for the newel post and found it. And I remember thinking with total clarity, the window on the 3rd floor turn does not close, which means it does not open either. It travels 2 inches and binds on the frame, and it had done that twice a day for 3 weeks in front of a woman who wrote it down. I got 2 hands on it, and it went 2 inches and bound. I want you to know that I tried it 4 times. I am not a large person, and I have carried a 22-kilo box up an outside iron staircase. And I put everything I had into a sash window 4 times with a 3-year-old in the crook of my arm. And it did not move.
And that is the only moment in the entire evening when I was frightened in the way people mean when they say the word. Ida had my coat in both fists. She did not make a sound. She has never once in her life made a sound at the wrong time.
Then a hand came out of the dark and closed on my wrist. "I have you." I did not look up. I did not have to. She had come in from the second floor with the line, and she was on her knees on the turn beside me, and she had a mask in her free hand, which she put over Ida's face first, before mine, before her own. And then she said 4 words in the voice she uses for numbers. "Ostergaard, get behind me." She hit the window with the flat of her shoulder twice. It went. Frame, sash, the lot, out into the yard, and the air came in like something arriving. And she got her arm under Ida and her other hand in the back of my coat and moved us both out onto the flat of the second floor roof and down the ladder that was already there. Because there was a crew on that ladder, because there is always a crew on the ladder, because she is thorough. 11 minutes start to finish, from the goods lift moving to the 2 of us on the tarmac. We came out into a yard full of light, 4 appliances, the whole of Kestrel Street and half of Bellevue. Pet Nwosu in a coat over her cardigan being extremely rude to a police officer about the boxes on the second floor. B sitting on a curb with her hand pressed over her mouth and her sleeve pushed up, and the fire watch time still on her wrist in pencil. Somebody put a blanket round me. Somebody took Ida out of my arms and I let them, which surprised me. And Aveline Roth came out of the smoke behind us and pulled her own mask off and stood in the yard with her hands on her knees for about 4 seconds, which is the only time I have ever seen her need a moment. The triage tent was set up against the wall of the laundrette, which I found funny at the time in a way that I now understand was shock. They did Ida first. She was fine. She is fine. She was always fine. She had had a mask on her face inside 60 seconds, and she had spent the entire incident with her face in my collar. But they do the full set on a small child. So there was a paramedic on one knee in front of her with a penlight, and Ida sat on a folding chair with her feet not reaching the ground, and let her, because she is a person who cooperates with systems. She said, "Follow the light for me." And then she said, to her colleague, in the flat voice of someone filling in a box on a form, "Pupils equal and reactive. Gray. She's got a copper ring on the iris. Outer edge, both sides. That's unusual. That only seen that once before." Aveline was 8 feet away with a radio in her hand. I watched her stop, not turn, stop, the way the whole of a person can stop while still standing up. The radio was halfway to her mouth and it stayed there. And her eyes went to Ida and stayed, and I could see her doing the thing she does with numbers, reading them in 3s, going back over 4 years in about 6 seconds, and finding the place where the arithmetic changed. Then her jaw moved once at the hinge, and her thumb went flat against the crack in the watch strap. Ottoline Roth was standing at the mouth of the yard with 2 chief officers and a clipboard, and she was not looking at the building. She was looking at her daughter, looking at my child. And her face did something I have never seen it do before or since, which was nothing at all, very slowly. Nobody said anything for a long time. It was, I think, 4 hours. There's a great deal of administration after a fire. There are statements and there is a cordon. And there is a loss adjuster who arrives implausibly fast. They took Ida and me to the hospital for observation because of the smoke, and I sat in a plastic chair in a corridor at 3:30 in the morning with my daughter asleep across my knees and a blanket that smelled of the inside of an ambulance. And I did not think about anything at all. At 4 o'clock exactly, Aveline Roth came down the corridor. She still had the turnout trousers on. She had washed her face and missed a line of soot along the jaw. She stopped about 6 feet away, which is further than she needed to stand, and she stayed standing. She said, "Is she all right?" And I said, "She's all right." And she said, "Good." And then she said, "I'm going to break the agreement." I said, "I know." She said, "I want you to know I'm choosing to. It isn't the child. I would have kept it about the child. It's the window." I said, "The window." And she said, "I have flagged that window 3 times in 11 years. This morning I told you I wouldn't be in a position to flag it again. And at 20 to 7 this evening, I stood in a yard and watched a 4th floor go and understood that if I had made anybody actually action that window instead of writing it down neatly 3 times, you would have been out of that building in 90 seconds. She said, "I have spent 4 years being extremely careful. Careful is what I do instead of the thing." Then she put her hand inside her coat and took out a piece of paper. It was folded in 3. It was soft at the folds the way paper gets when it has been carried. And it had been carried. And the fold lines had gone furry and started to split, which takes years. She said, "This was given to me on the 18th of November 4 years ago. I have carried it since. 18 months ago, I asked for the lab's own copy and was told the file had been closed at the requesting party's instruction, and I have not been able to get past that. And I have not come near you because I could not prove it." And I took my coat off the back of the chair, and I put my hand in the inside pocket, and I took out a square of gray linen hemmed by hand on all 4 sides. I unfolded it on the seat beside me, 2 squares of tissue, 1 sheet folded in 3, 2 columns, an empty flag box, a stability index of 94, and the word unusual in biro in the margin. Same date, same lab, same reference number. My signature at the bottom of both from the same consent form, one of them cut and set. She looked at the 2 of them side by side on a plastic chair in a hospital corridor for a long time. Then she said very quietly, 94. And I said, yes. And she said, "You've had this the whole time." And I said, "In my coat. Through 11 burned buildings." She sat down on the floor with her back against the wall in turnout trousers at 4 in the morning, which is the single most undignified thing I have ever seen that woman do. She said, "Why didn't you come?" Why? And I said the true thing, which I had never said out loud to anybody, including Pet, including myself. I said, "Because if I came and you already knew, then you'd left anyway." And I could survive a woman who was lied to. I couldn't survive a woman who wasn't. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "And I didn't come because I couldn't prove it," which is the same sentence with better manners on it. I said, "Yes." And she said, "We're very alike. It's never once worked in our favor." At 4:20, the doors at the end of the corridor opened, and Ottoline Roth came through them. She had come from the incident. She had the clipboard under her arm. Behind her, because a fire of that size ends with everybody in the same building, were 2 chief officers, a station officer from Kestrel Street, 3 of Aveline's own crew still in their kit, and Pet Nwosu, who had talked her way in and would talk her way anywhere. Aveline stood up off the floor, and Ottoline looked at the child asleep on my knees, and she said, in the reasonable voice, "Aveline, not here." And Aveline said yes, here. She picked the 2 sheets up off the plastic chair, and she held them out, one in each hand, at the level of her mother's eyes. And she said, "You gave me this one. This is the other one. They have the same reference number." And Ottoline said, "I never lied to you." And Aveline said, "No, you didn't. You handed me a piece of paper and let me do the lying myself for 4 years in my own head every day. That is a thing you did. And it is the only thing you have ever done that I cannot have." The corridor was extremely quiet. Then Aveline Roth turned round, in front of her mother and 2 chief officers, and 3 of her own crew, and a 71-year-old conservator in a cardigan. And she came and stood in front of a plastic chair. And she said, not quietly, not to me alone, "This is Wren Ostergaard. She is my bonded mate. She has been for 6 years, and she never stopped being it. And this is our daughter. And I am claiming them both in front of every one of you, so that there is no version of tomorrow in which anybody has to wonder." And then she said, "Ostergaard, may I?" And I said yes. She went down on one knee in front of the chair because of the child asleep across me, and she put her hand at my jaw and her thumb at my cheekbone, and she put her forehead against mine and stayed there. My daughter did not wake up. Somebody in that corridor started clapping and stopped immediately, which I think about a lot. And I said the 3 words into the 6 inches between us, 4 years late, in the correct direction for the first time in my life. And this is where I have to stop, because what happened next was never meant for YouTube. If you want the uncut version, it's waiting on my Patreon. The link is in the description. Halcyon Row lost the 4th and 5th floors and kept everything else, which is to say it lost 11,000 items and kept 129,000. And the report found that a section of cut shelving had been stacked against a lift shaft with a hot edge on it after the watch stood down at 7. The 41 pages my grandmother carried out of a parish hall in 1961 came down the ladder in a gray box in the arms of a probationary firefighter named Imi Kwan, who did not know what they were, and who came to the building 9 weeks later on her day off to find out, and who now volunteers on Saturdays. I have told her what they are 4 times. She asks every time. I think she likes the story. Ottoline Roth resigned in the June. She did it properly, with a date and a handover and no statement, and nobody outside the service knows why. Aveline has not spoken to her. I have twice. The second time was in a garden center car park in October, which is not a location either of us chose. She asked after Ida. I said she was at nursery and she could count to 40, but refused to acknowledge the number 29. And Ottoline Roth laughed, 1 syllable, entirely involuntary, and then stood there looking extremely tired. She said, I would like to have met her. And I said, that's not mine to give you, but it isn't closed. And you know where the building is. She has not come yet. I think she will. I'm not in a hurry, and neither apparently is she. We are all of us people who take 4 years about things. Aveline did not take county command. I want to be honest that I did not ask her not to, and that when she told me, I said, "Are you certain?" 3 separate times, because I have a great deal of experience of being the reason a Roth does not do something. She said she had turned it down at 8:30 on the morning of the 10th of March, before we had discussed anything at all, and that it had not been about me. It had been about a window. She is on prevention now. Buildings, not fires. She goes into places that have not burned yet and makes lists, and this time somebody actions them, because she has stopped writing them neatly and started standing in doorways until they are signed. We live over the laundrette still. It is too small. We are looking. Nwosu comes on Sundays and has opinions about the boiler. B passed her final assessment in the spring and has stopped writing on her hand, mostly. The tin of buttons lives on the windowsill, and the system has expanded. There are now 3 piles, and the 3rd pile is buttons Ida is considering, and no one has been told the criteria. The cloth is in my coat. There is nothing folded inside it anymore. It is a square of gray linen for lifting ash, and that is all it has to be now, and I use it 4 days a week, and my mother hemmed it, and it does the job. Last month she came off late and got in at 1:10 in the morning, and I was awake because I am always awake, and she came and stood in the bedroom doorway on the hinge side, out of the way she does. I said, "Bad one?" And she said, "No, long one." And she came and sat on the edge of the bed with her back to me and undid the watch with the crack in the crystal and put it on the table. And she was tired in the shoulders, and I put my hand flat between them. And I said the 3 words, the way she used to from a door, the way I did not know for 3 years was a promise and not a tick. The way I have said them every single day since a hospital corridor at 4 in the morning, and intend to go on saying them until one of us is not there to hear it. I have you,